All right, so we are jumping into week 2 of our series for Midweek Online called Faith Under Fire. Last week, Pastor Kyle got us started talking about Joseph. And he really honed in on a lot of the things on his background, on his family, some of the rough dynamics at play. Joseph's brothers literally sold him into slavery. So his situation with his siblings was probably a little bit worse than maybe what you are going through, even in quarantine. So Joseph's family dynamic was really difficult, and there was a lot of favoritism that took place, and Pastor Kyle spoke about that in week 1 of our series. But this week, we're moving into some new stuff about Joseph and about what he went through. And before we jump into the text, though, I want to give you the big point. And the big point for this week is this: trusting God is our only hope. Trusting God is our only hope. And I want to give you this on the front end so that you, as we read through the text and we read through some more of the life of Joseph, we are going to see how he trusts God and why that is so important and why that ultimately becomes his only hope in life. So if you've got a Bible, go ahead and jump to Genesis 39. If you don't, just go ahead and hit pause on this video so that you can run and grab it real quick and open it to Genesis 39 because we're about to jump in. So Genesis 39 says this: Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of the Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. So we're going to pause right there because at this point, things are seeming to go kind of well for Joseph, right? The beginning of Joseph's life, what Kyle talked about last week, it was a little rough. Joseph's brother sold him into slavery. He had some difficult dynamics with his family. Not to mention, after they sold him into slavery, they went back to his dad and was like, hey, so Joseph was killed and mauled by an animal. He's dead. Here's his coat, right? So Joseph is sold into this situation, into this slavery situation where he has no way out. He can't get out because nobody knows that he's alive except for the brothers who sold him into slavery. So it's kind of dire at first, but then he gets transferred over to Potiphar, and who is really high up in the Egyptian ranks, and things kind of go well because of something really, really important that it says in verses 2 and 3. It says that the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And then in verse 3, it said his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So what we see here is really important. This is the most important thing that I want you to hold on to, is that the Lord was with Joseph. And not just that, that means that despite all that had happened, despite the fact that Joseph was sold into slavery, despite the fact that his brothers told his dad that he was dead, despite all of these things, the Lord did not forsake Joseph. The Lord did not leave Joseph. Because from the outside perspective, from a worldly perspective, it can look like, did Joseph just get completely abandoned by God? And the answer to that is no. It is made very clear in this passage and the passages we're going to continue to read that God did not abandon Joseph. Not only that, God is the reason all of these things were working out for Joseph. So at this point in the story, it seems like things are actually looking up for Joseph. And he was coming out of a bad situation, and God made something good that Joseph's going to get to live in, right? But let's continue. Verse 5. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and the field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. So let's pause again here. Potiphar just steps back and basically puts Joseph in charge of everything. And Potiphar's living the life. He doesn't have to worry about anything. He's just allowing Joseph to do all of that. And that's because, again, that God was doing something amazing in Joseph's life. You got to keep in perspective that the success was given to Joseph by God. It wasn't just on Joseph's merit. It wasn't because Joseph was just the best at everything he did. Now, he probably was pretty talented. He probably was pretty good at all the things that he was doing. But the bottom line is it really doesn't matter how good we as people are. Because ultimately, we need God's provision to allow us to succeed in these things. And Joseph is succeeding in all of these things because God has made it so. Because God was blessing Joseph. And from an earthly perspective, it's also easy to look at the fact that Joseph early on had it bad and was kind of doomed. But we see here that God is blessing him and giving him more opportunity. So let's keep going. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Okay, so let me explain to you why it's talking about how good looking Joseph is. The reason is because we're about to find out what that has caused. Joseph was a really good looking guy, and that is going to cause some problems for him with the wife of his master. So, verse 7. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." She looked at Joseph and was like, "Yo, you look pretty good. So let's sleep together." That's literally the direction that this is taken. So let's keep going. Let's see how this unfolds. Verse 8, but he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. So how then can I do this great wickedness and a sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. So this is an incredible example of faithfulness. Joseph is in the position that has the complete trust of his master. Again, Potiphar is doing nothing except picking out what he's going to eat every day when it comes to taking care of his home. Like, Joseph is in charge of all of it. He has complete trust from his master. And then the master's wife is coming to Joseph and saying, "Hey, I want you to sleep with me." This is a huge temptation, first of all. But here's what's crazy. Joseph realizes that this is not the right path to take. He realizes, I cannot do this. This is not the right thing. And here's what I love. He isn't saying no to Potiphar's wife because he is worried about his job or his status. Sure, those things play a part in that. Sure, he doesn't want to lose those things. But here is the bottom line. Here's really why Joseph decides to say no to Potiphar's wife. Because he sees this as not just a temptation that or a thing that if he does, he'll lose his job, but further that it is something that is a sin against God. Joseph recognizes that if he were to do this thing, if he were to make the wrong decision here, it wouldn't just cost him his job or potentially his life. This would be a sin against God, who has blessed him, who has been with him, who has shown him favor despite difficulties in his life. So Joseph successfully overcame this temptation not once, but day after day after day. We don't actually know how long this went on for, but Joseph consistently says no to the temptation of sin because he understands that this would be a sin against God. And it's not worth that. It's not worth that. So let's keep going. Verse 11. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and got out of the house. So let's just acknowledge for a second that this woman is crazy. She is just off her rocker. She has now stepped up her game to physically attacking Joseph to get what she wants. Like, that is just next level here. But this is a great reminder that the enemy, meaning Satan, will do whatever he can to cause you and I to stumble and to give in to temptation. But we always have a way out. We always have a decision to make when we're tempted. Joseph, at this point, he said no over and over and over, and he has consistently walked through this day in and day out, and he's choosing no every single time. He's choosing not to sin against God. But at this point, it gets next level weird, and she grabs a hold of him and is like almost going to try and force him into this thing. And what does Joseph do? He books it. He gets out of there. He figures out a way to run from this temptation. And he left his garment. So let's keep going. Verse 13. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." It's crazy. It's crazy. Verse 19, as soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Okay, so this is the unfolding, the unraveling of what seemed like a great situation, and where God was prospering and giving Joseph a better life than what he lived because of his brother's act of putting him into slavery. Potiphar's wife is letting loose all kinds of lies about what happened in this situation, because we know, based on the text, what it says, that Joseph is innocent here. He did the right things. But Potiphar's wife is lying about this situation. And we have to keep in mind that Joseph was still a slave. Though Joseph was living a better life than what you would expect a slave to live, and he had more responsibilities and probably a lot more freedoms, he was still a slave, which meant that he had no legal rights. It meant that when Potiphar decided and heard this thing about Joseph, he's allowed to do whatever he wants. He can execute Joseph if he wanted, or he can immediately throw him into jail. There's no questioning, there's no trial, there's nothing like that, because Joseph had no rights as a slave. So he immediately just gets thrown into jail. So at this point, if you stop the story, it would seem like Joseph did what was right, overcame temptation, but God just let this terrible thing happen to him. So it raises the question, did God abandon Joseph? Why is no one standing up for Joseph? This seems so unfair to Joseph. But we've got to keep reading, right? Because the story doesn't stop here, thankfully. Verse 21. Super important. But the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. That word steadfast means firm and unwavering. In light of all of the things, even though all of these things have happened, even though he was sold into slavery, even though he was wrongfully accused of sleeping with someone's wife, even though all of this had happened and he's been thrown into prison, God's steadfast love was unwavering. It was there, and Joseph had God with him. God is still loving Joseph. And we see this further because let's keep reading. And gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So again, we're seeing that Joseph is in this rough situation, and God is going to give him favor in the sight of the people who are in charge, okay? Verse 22, and the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge. Pause. Joseph has been put in charge of everything in the prison that he is a prisoner of. He's in charge of the prison. He's in charge of all the prisoners. He's in charge of the day ins and day outs of what happens there. The guy who actually is overseeing all this is completely checked out and just letting Joseph run the place. Why? Because the Lord was with him, meaning Joseph. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. This is a big deal. Again, Joseph is not in a great situation, but the Lord blesses him and uses him within his struggle, and some would say amidst his suffering. I mean, many people would say that being sold into slavery and your family thinking that you're dead and being wrongly accused and put in prison and all of these things would be suffering. So amidst the suffering and the struggle, God is still blessing Joseph and using him. And it's important to realize that this becomes a pattern in Joseph's life. He gets passed over and treated poorly by the world multiple times, but God uses the mess that the world produces in Joseph's life for good and for his glory. God uses the mess that the world is producing in Joseph's life for his good and for his glory. And we have to remember this, because it's so easy to look at this whole thing and just assume that Joseph had done everything right, but was constantly getting the worst outcomes. But if you take another step back and look at the big picture and see how God was at work throughout Joseph's entire life, and you kind of bullet point this thing out, it makes a lot more sense. And you can see the sovereignty of God and how God was orchestrating and helping guide every situation to the ends that end up happening for Joseph, which is a great place to be in once he gets to a new position in Egypt. So let's just bullet point this out real quick. He ends up being Potiphar's slave, right? He was sold into slavery. He ends up being Potiphar's slave. Potiphar was an officer of Pharaoh. Why is that significant? Because when Potiphar's wife messes everything up by lying about what happened, Potiphar has the authority to put Joseph in prison, not just any prison, but the prison where the Pharaoh or the king, where his prisoners were specifically kept. So that's where Joseph ends up. This is a big deal. Why? Because the Lord continues to give Joseph favor, even in the prison, and Joseph eventually starts to interpret dreams of the prisoners in the prison, right? So like, a couple of guys are having these weird dreams and they're like, we don't know what they mean. So Joseph is interpreting those things. Well, because Joseph was in the king's prison where his prisoners were kept, the Pharaoh, the king, same guy, he gets wind of this and he understands that there's a guy down here that's interpreting dreams, because the Pharaoh, guess what, was having some weird dreams. So because he ends up in this thing and he ends up having a good reputation here, he ends up being allowed to have an audience with the Pharaoh who was having these dreams so that Joseph could interpret the dreams. When Joseph interprets the dreams, long story short, he becomes the second most powerful person in Egypt. Second only to the Pharaoh. All of these things are happening. All of these dysfunctional, difficult struggles are happening in Joseph's life. But you see how it's orchestrated and how he ends up where he ends up if you look at the whole picture. So to bring things back around to our big point, trusting God is our only hope. If you're trusting in your own ability, you're going to fail. If you're trusting in someone else or something else, some organization, some job, some human being, it's going to let you down. There's no hope in that. We have to look at Joseph's life and circumstances and realize that every step of the way, God was with him. And even when it seemed as though Joseph was doing everything right and only getting the worst results, we have to remember that God was working behind the scenes for Joseph, for his good, and for the glory of God and for the advancement of God's kingdom. It is very easy for us to go through life and wonder why things aren't necessarily the way we think that they should be. Maybe we've been fighting against temptation like Joseph and succeeding, but still our life is difficult. Still we don't feel like we're getting all the things that we need to be getting. We don't feel like we're getting a leg up. Maybe things are going okay for us, but we are struggling to see long term what God wants. Maybe we're falling to sin and we're struggling to see the way out. Maybe you're the person that just doesn't have a personal relationship with Jesus. And because of that, you can't see what it means to have God with you. You don't understand what that concept looks like, to have God with you, fighting for you when you can't fight for yourself. But listen. No matter your circumstance or place in life, we have to remember a couple of things. One, our world is broken because of sin. There is wrong, there is hurt, there is sadness, there is pain in this world that we cannot control, that surfaces in our individual lives. And that's not because you've necessarily just not figured it out. That's because the world is broken. Because the world is dark and full of sin. And because of that, all that hurt and pain affects you. It may not seem fair, but it is. Because listen, as humankind, as mankind, the only thing that we deserve from God is death. Eternal separation from Him because of the sin in our life. But He's given us Jesus. He was with Joseph. God has given us Jesus. He's given us this mercy. He's given us this grace. And all we have to do is accept it. And that helps us navigate all the darkness, all the pain, all the suffering, all the unfairness, all the brokenness in this world. We can navigate because Jesus saved us and made us right with God and allows us to navigate through these things and work through these things and trust in our hope, which is eternity with Jesus. And the second thing here that you got to remember is that in the midst of that brokenness, whether you know Jesus or not, He loves you and He wants you to trust Him. If you're the person that doesn't know Jesus and you haven't accepted Jesus as your Savior, you haven't understand that you are sinful, and that without Jesus, you will be forever separated from God in a place called hell. If you've never understood that, if you've never connected the dots of the fact that Jesus was God's Son, He was born of a virgin, He lived a perfect life, and He died on the cross so that your sin that you can't pay for on your own, He died to take your place, to take your punishment, to take the wrath of God. This was not fair for Jesus. But Jesus did it for you and for me. If you're the person that doesn't know Jesus, He wants you to know Him, and He wants you to know that there is greater life in abundance. Joseph was living an abundant life, even though from our perspective at times it looks broken and dark and scary and difficult. And if you do know Jesus, listen, God has greater plans for you than you have any idea about. He wants to use you in ways that you have not even thought about. He wants you to trust Him with your life and surrender it to Him so that He can use it for His good, for your good, and for His glory and the advancement of His kingdom. We are supposed to hold our lives with open hands, no matter what that looks like, and trust God because He's our only hope. God had amazing plans for Joseph, and He used every circumstance in his life to get him to the completion of that plan. And Joseph trusted God. He trusted Him because God was with him, even in difficult times that seemed unfair and hopeless. So what now what? If you don't know what that means so you've heard all of these things. You've heard God's word read to you. You have looked at God's word. Now what are you doing with it? What are you supposed to do from here? If you're a believer, this is what you do. Thank God for where He has you, and trust God with where He wants to take you. Thank God for where He has you. Even if you might look at it and go, well, this isn't everything that I wanted it to be. Thank God that He has you there. Look for what God wants to use you for. And trust Him for where He wants to take you. Trust Him. Trust Him. If you're willing to trust Him with your eternity, you should be willing to trust Him with your now. So trust Him. If you don't know Jesus, this is the opportunity. If you don't know Jesus, trust Him today for the first time for your salvation. Believe that He died for you and that He rose from the dead and conquered sin and proved that death and sin and brokenness cannot conquer Him. believe that and ask Him, save me because I can't save myself. Save me because I've sinned against you. Give me hope and trust Jesus. Father God, I thank you, God, for who you are. I thank you that you are trustworthy, that you are consistent. God, that you love us. Even though we are broken and we don't deserve your love, but God, you freely give it, and I'm grateful for that. Lord, I pray for the students that are listening or the people that are listening and watching this video, Lord, that you would intercede in their life, that your Holy Spirit would show them that you are trustworthy. And God, that you are our only hope. I pray that people would open up and surrender their life and say, God, I trust you with whatever you want for us, for me. And God, I pray for whoever's watching this that doesn't know Jesus, Lord, that you would convict their heart, that you would draw them to yourself, and Lord, that they would respond by repenting, turning away from their sins, confessing that it was wrong, and asking Jesus to save them. God, we love you and we thank you for your word and the truth that is in it. We thank you that it guides us and helps us understand you more. And Lord, we trust you for the next steps and for where you want to take us in life. In Jesus' name, amen.